MS Now's Jackie Alemany just spoke to President Trump. Eli Stokols is White House and Foreign Affairs correspondent for Politico. Former Congresswoman Jane Harman previously served as ranking member on the House Intelligence Committee. She's now President Emerita of the Wilson International Center for Scholars. It's good to have all of you here. So, Jackie, as I said, you spoke to the president today about the prospect of negotiations to end this war. What did he tell you?
Yeah, Chris, well, first, I want to commend you on that intro and that scripting, because this is a really complicated situation. And I feel like you and your producers really distilled it perfectly, because there are a lot of players here that are saying competing, directly contradictory things. President telling me this morning in a brief phone call, in an answer to my question about when in-person negotiations are going to resume after they were postponed this week, essentially that he has no idea. He claimed that the Iranians have no idea who their leader is. He said, quote, they have no idea who the hell is speaking for their country. He then, after our conversation, reiterated this claim. I'll read you his Truth Social post quickly. But he said Iran is having a very hard time figuring out who their leader is. They just don't know. The infighting is between the hardliners, who have been losing badly on the battlefield, and the moderates, who are not very moderate at all. Then he continues, no ship can enter or leave without the approval of the United States Navy. That's in reference to the blockade. It is sealed up tight until such time as Iran is able to make a deal. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Now, our colleague, David Rode, I should point out, did a quick fact check of my conversation with the president, and in conversations he had with his sources and experts on Iran, they basically said that Trump's claims are incorrect, that the government is not divided despite of claims of deep divisions, and that the emergence of a new regime is simply untrue. As most of our viewers know, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was taken out by the U.S. military and the Israeli military at the start of this war. His son, again, Ayatollah Khamenei, has taken over and is sort of the board of the director. But the power structure is very clear now, and it remains unclear when Iran is going to decide that they're actually going to come to the negotiating table. There have been some Iranian voices, members of their parliamentary and an Iran representative to the UN, who said that if the U.S. decides to drop this blockade, that is, in fact, causing a lot of economic pressure on the Iranians, then maybe that would be the impetus for them to resume negotiations. But at the end of the day, we keep talking about these maximalist demands that both sides have that are essentially point by point contradicting one another. Those have not been resolved. J.D. Vance, Steve Witkoff, and Jared Kushner were obviously teed up to go to Islamabad at the beginning of the week. That didn't happen. Now we have this indefinite ceasefire that is unilaterally declared by President Trump, that comes against the backdrop of everything you just laid out, Chris, which is these crippling economic numbers, a worldwide energy security threat, the greatest in modern history, according to experts on the matter, along with these gas prices and increasing political pressures that the president's dealing with along with this May deadline that GOP lawmakers were expecting things to be really wrapped up by now.
And if I can return the compliment, you had a very brief time to talk to the president. You got a lot out of him that's, I think, really relevant to where we stand today. So thank you for that. Congresswoman, look, I guess you could argue that you could see why the president would say, oh, it's not us, it's them. They don't have the power structure. They don't have somebody in charge who we can legitimately negotiate with. But besides commenting on that, I also want to ask you, do you think in the end, that matters to the American people who, as this new CNBC poll shows, feel like they can't live the life that they were leading before this war started?
Well, as for the Iranians, they have an adequate power structure. They still have some of this religious overlay, but the Revolutionary Guards are large and in charge, and that government is not going to fall anytime soon. And I've noticed that President Trump has stopped talking about the Iranian people. I don't think they're his audience. I think his audience is the markets, not the American people and not anybody else. But at any rate, no. So the American people who are not being addressed directly about this and never were, are really concerned about what you talked about, which is, can they afford to live as they were? Answer, not so much. The Wall Street Journal has it right. There are we're in a crippling stalemate, but it's not just in America, it's worldwide. Some report that Asia's getting hit harder than we are. And markets move on international numbers. So Trump saying that we have plenty of oil and gas does not mean that gas prices that you just showed are going down anytime soon. This is a massive, major election issue. And I would imagine that members of Congress, starting right now, especially Republicans, are all over our president, wanting to know what he is going to do. The point about that Jackie made, or maybe you did, Chris, about the deadline for Congress is right. On May 1, that's a few minutes from now, just a few days, Congress has to do something, unless the president asks for an additional exemption. But my deathless phrase is CACO. Congress always chickens out, not just taco. And Congress is ducking this. And having a vote on a war powers resolution, I think, is crucial. If the Senate and the House want to walk away from it and not declare war, then I can't imagine he has any authority to send boots in harm's way. And thousands of people are now boarding ships headed to the Middle East. So the reporting is. So I don't think the president wants to do that. I think he's actually weary of this and turning his attention elsewhere. And the sad news is we ever started this. We would have been so much better off if the status quo ante were still in place and there were a much more thoughtful way to try to talk about Iran and its nuclear arsenal, and the Strait of Hormuz would have been open.
So it's striking, Eli, that we're here where we are. We know what the polls say, both about the president and what his actions have meant to the American people. And he's saying not only, as Jackie reported, that there's no time frame for ending this war, but also suggesting that they don't feel any pressure to cut a deal. Based on everything I just laid out about those economic consequences for a majority of Americans, how long can the White House and the president hold out without doing something to change the dynamic around this war?
I think that's the big question, Chris. I think, it may be economic pressure that ultimately gets the president to lift the blockade, to be able to restart talks and to push this to some kind of cleaner resolution than where we are now, which is just kind of suspended in animation, as the president has put out there and made very clear that this is an indefinite ceasefire. The Iranians made no movement towards the White House position, and yet the president did not follow through on his threats. It's pretty clear at this point that the military, going back to the military campaign, the kinetic phase of this war, it's not something the president really sees a lot of upside in doing, either because it's obvious that continuing to bomb Iran is only going to, they can absorb that. And secondly, any sort of more boots on the ground type options are going to result in casualties in a war that's already tremendously unpopular. So if the president's not interested in that, but also doesn't have the leverage to force Iran to the table, he's sort of stepped back and just said, well, we'll wait till they can get it together. It's giving this sense that the president may be thinking about just trying to walk away from this almost irrespective of the outcomes in the region. He has talked about the red line of Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. But to be able to get to some kind of agreement that is adjacent to or similar to the old JCPOA, where you're essentially getting concessions on their nuclear program in exchange for economic relief, sanctions relief, he's going to probably have to lift that blockade to get them back to the table. He is going to have to move too. The White House loves to hit that talking point, that the thing the president says about we have the cards, we have the upper hand here. It's clear Iran has some leverage. And I think the economic pressure, I talked to people inside the West Wing yesterday who were surprisingly nonchalant about what may be ahead in terms of the costs of goods, gas prices continuing to go up, where we may be headed, what the polls already say. But I don't know that members of Congress, Republican members of Congress, are feeling all that good about it. And so if that pressure continues, I think that may be ultimately the reason why the president adjusts his position to try to get back to the negotiations and find a way to wrap this up.
Yeah, and one of the things that supporters of the president, including his press secretary, have said is that he's a guy who can walk and chew gum at the same time. He can handle a lot of stuff. But I think it's worth noting that he has not been just focused on Iran, but instead, over just the last 24 hours or so, he posted on social media about the TV ratings for the last season of The Apprentice, which was 22 years ago. He promoted a biography about Justice Alito. He called Obama aide Norm Eisen a sleazebag and pushed unfounded claims that the Virginia redistricting now, the election was rigged. Where is the president's head right now? How focused do we know he might or might not be, Eli, on this war?
Well, he's pretty focused on it, but this is always a president who is, going to react to whatever he sees in front of him, what he hears from allies on the phone, what he sees on television. That's not changing. I had a conversation in the last 24 hours with someone in the White House about the messaging strategy and the kind of why they're so all over the place and creating so much confusion. They talk about they're confused. They don't know who to deal with in Iran. I think a lot of the world is confused about the messages that are coming out of the White House. And I said, why does the president keep picking up the phone and putting stuff out there in drips and drabs with reporters? Why is there not more clarity? And I think the answer, reading between the lines a little bit, is that nobody can tell the president not to do it. Nobody can tell him, sir, don't pick up the phone. We need to be more strategic. We need to be more consistent. There's just no one there that's going to force him to do that. There's a deep, abiding belief that the president is the best messenger, that he knows what he's doing. And so that's where we are.